What would you do if your own parents tried to steal everything you built, every dollar, every property, every ounce of freedom, and believed you were too weak to stop them? The chandelier glowed above the long mahogany table, throwing polished light across crystal glasses and china that gleamed too perfectly. My mother's smile was sweet, rehearsed, as she poured another glass of wine, while my father slid a thick envelope across the table with the ease of a man who thought the outcome was already his. Inside were pages demanding that every account, every investment, every home I had fought for be surrendered into their control. They called it a family trust. I knew it was a trap. Their eyes shone with triumph, waiting for me to break. Instead, I let a calm smile touch my lips. They didn't realize I had been preparing for this moment all along. Independence wasn't handed to me. It was forged in the quiet spaces where help should have been but never came. I still remember the day I asked my parents to co-sign a student loan. I was barely 18, eager to study, ready to prove myself. Their refusal came wrapped in the language of tough love. You need to learn responsibility, Serafina. Life doesn't come with handouts. But it didn't feel like tough love. It felt like abandonment. While my friends packed up for dorms their parents helped fund, I signed on for double shifts at a diner, dragging myself home to a basement apartment with peeling paint and mold in the corners. Some nights, I skipped meals just to make rent. My hands smelled like grease, my feet ached from standing 12 hours, but I told myself each dollar saved was a brick in the foundation of my future. When Portland began shifting in my early 20s, I saw what others ignored. The neighborhoods were gentrifying, houses boarded up, kitchens left to rot, tiles falling from walls. Most people passed by, shaking their heads at the decay. I saw opportunity. I scraped together a down payment with tips and small savings and bought my first wreck. I can still feel the weight of the hammer in my hands, the sting of blisters forming along my palms. I stripped tiles until my knuckles bled, painted cabinets long past midnight, carried lumber up creaky stairs. I wasn't just flipping houses. I was flipping my life. Every decision, every nail, every gallon of paint was an investment in a tomorrow where no one could tell me I hadn't earned my place. By 25, I stood with keys to my first Craftsman duplex. It wasn't grand by my parents' standards, but to me, it was proof. Proof that discipline could matter more than pedigree, that sweat could matter more than bloodline. I walked through the empty rooms that day, inhaling the scent of fresh paint and sawdust, and felt the quiet satisfaction of someone who knew the ground beneath her feet was truly her own. When I showed my parents, I expected pride, maybe even the faintest spark of recognition. Instead, I got dismissal. My mother gave a soft laugh, swirling her wine. "You were lucky the market turned," she said, as if all those nights of aching muscles were the flip of a coin. My father added, "Without us, you'd never manage." The words stung, sharper than I wanted to admit, but I didn't argue. Their contempt wasn't new. It was a language I had grown up with. Still, inside me, something hardened. I didn't need their approval. I needed their absence to remind me why I fought. The duplex turned into 3 properties, then 5. Every profit was reinvested, every dollar stretched. Contractors tried to talk down to me, but I stood firm, correcting quotes, negotiating terms, learning the language of the business until it became second nature. I didn't wear privilege on my skin. I wore grit under my nails. My life became a series of early mornings at construction sites and late nights with spreadsheets, mapping out mortgage payments against potential rental income. The sacrifices were relentless, but so were the results. And yet, even as I built brick by brick, my parents hovered like shadows, claiming ownership of my success in casual remarks. Of course you did. Well, you got our drive. Or worse, all this discipline comes from us. They wanted credit without having lifted a finger. They wanted to plant their flag on land they had never walked. Still, I kept going. The blisters healed into calluses. The moldy basement gave way to sunlit duplexes. And the girl who once begged for a cosigner became a woman who no longer needed anyone's signature but her own. I carried the scars of struggle like medals. Each one whispered the same truth. No one had saved me. I had saved myself. That truth became both my shield and my curse. Because independence, while hard won, was something my parents despised. They didn't see resilience. They saw rebellion. They didn't see a daughter carving her path. They saw an asset slipping beyond their reach. And so, even as I built my future, they began plotting how to reclaim it. I didn't realize it then, but every scraped knuckle, every late-night ledger, every dismissive laugh at my success was leading me to the moment when the people who once refused me a loan would come after everything I had built. At first, the signs came quietly, disguised as family wisdom. Over coffee one morning, my mother leaned in, her voice silky smooth. Family must stick together, Serafina. What's the point of building all these walls between us if we're supposed to share the same future? She said it like a suggestion, but the weight behind her words told me it was something more. My father joined in with his favorite tactic, guilt. After all we sacrificed for you, don't we deserve to feel secure? The phrase rang like a bell in my mind, because what he called sacrifice had always looked to me like distance and neglect. For a while, I brushed these moments aside. I told myself it was just their way of holding on, of trying to stay relevant in a world that had moved past them. But the comments grew sharper, less veiled. My mother would point to the accounts she assumed I had and sigh, "Money doesn't mean anything if it isn't shared with family." My father's jaw would tighten, and he would remark, "It's selfish to keep everything in your name." Each word dug in deeper, not because of what they said, but because of what they implied, that my independence wasn't mine at all, but something they believed belonged to them. The day everything shifted came when I returned home earlier than usual. My apartment was small, but it was mine leases signed by me alone. Locks recently changed. Every inch a reminder that I had built my life brick by brick. Yet when I opened the door, I found my father standing in the middle of the room. His hands were buried in the drawer where I kept property deeds and bank statements. He looked up, startled at first, before smoothing his expression into a stiff smile. "Just curious," he said, as if curiosity gave him the right to rifle through the evidence of my life. I forced a laugh, tried to brush it off as an old man's harmless wandering, but when he left, I noticed something chilling. The envelope holding my latest closing statement was out of place, as though someone had thumbed through it. The thought made my stomach turn. His presence wasn't protective, it was invasive. His hands hadn't been those of a father checking in. They had been the hands of a man searching for control. Once you see red flags, you can't unsee them. My mother's eyes lingered too long whenever I mentioned new contracts. My father's questions about my accounts carried an edge of hunger. At dinners, their phrases grew heavier, sharper. "You know, money should circulate within family. That's how we survive." Or, "If you cared about us the way we cared about you, You'd share what you've built. The implication was always the same. I was nothing more than a vault waiting to be opened. Inside me, a quiet battle raged. I kept asking myself, is it betrayal to suspect family? Am I cruel for holding them at a distance? Guilt slithered in like a shadow, whispering that maybe I was ungrateful, that maybe independence had hardened me too much. But then I would remember their refusal to co-sign my loan, their laughter at my first property, the way they claimed credit for successes they never touched. The whispers grew louder, twisting into a truth I could no longer ignore. This wasn't love. It was entitlement. The images stayed with me, the sight of my father's hand rifling through papers, my mother's thin smile that hid a glint of calculation. They weren't just crossing boundaries. They were erasing them, as though my life's work was nothing more than an extension of their desires. That realization hit me harder than any insult could, because love respects, but entitlement consumes. And in those moments, I knew I wasn't dealing with parents who wanted connection. I was dealing with people who saw me as their safety net, their last chance at stability. It was only a matter of time before they would make their move. The dinner table contract hadn't appeared out of nowhere. It was the inevitable result of years of conditioning, years of grooming me to believe that my independence was temporary, something they could claim when the timing was right. But the more they pushed, the clearer I became. Their words weren't about unity. They were about power. And no matter how many times guilt knocked on my door, I began to understand that protecting myself wasn't betrayal. It was survival. The chandelier above the mahogany table glistened like it was mocking me. Every crystal catching light that felt too sharp, too staged. China plates gleamed, silverware lined perfectly, the entire setting designed to impress and intimidate. My mother's smile was practiced sweetness as she poured another glass of wine. My father's hand was steady as he slid the thick envelope toward me. The sound of it landing on the polished wood was louder than it should have been, like the strike of a gavel. Trust, he said smoothly, as if the word itself carried weight enough to erase the pages inside. This way, we all move forward together. I pulled the papers free, scanning the first lines, and my stomach turned. It wasn't a trust, it was a total transfer of authority. Every property deed, every account, every investment I had clawed into existence would be theirs to control. Their smiles stayed fixed, but their eyes burned with expectation. My father nudged the pen closer. My mother leaned in, voice syrupy. It's just a formality, dear. One family, one future. The clink of silverware somewhere down the table echoed like a warning. The air pressed heavy, as though the room itself was holding its breath. I let the silence stretch, then lifted my gaze. Their triumph faltered for the first time, when I smiled not out of surrender, but calm defiance. If this is about trust, I said softly, you won't mind what I've prepared. The butler's voice broke through the tension. Ma'am, your lawyer is here. The rhythm of heels against marble filled the room before Helena appeared at my side, briefcase in hand, eyes cool and unreadable. My parents stiffened. Their grip on the performance slipped. My mother's fingers tightened around the stem of her glass. My father's jaw flexed. The masks they wore so carefully were cracking. Helena set the briefcase on the table, her movements measured. She flipped through the pages they had presented to me, her brow arching with every turn. Then, she snapped the folder shut with a sound that cut sharper than any blade. This isn't a trust, she said evenly. It's a complete transfer of authority. If Serafina signs this, you'll have unilateral control over every asset she owns. My father tried to recover, his voice calm but trembling at the edges. It's about protecting the family from risk. Helena tilted her head, unimpressed. Interesting. Because what I see is a document where she loses everything, and you surrender nothing. If it's about trust, why does only one person pay the price? The silence that followed was suffocating. I could hear the faint clink of a spoon against porcelain, the scratch of a chair leg as someone shifted. For the first time, fear flickered across my parents' faces before they smothered it. But I saw it, and it settled inside me like fuel. Then came the bait. My father leaned forward, his tone low, his words chosen like weapons. The Vance estate in Rhode Island is nearly free from probate, worth more than you can imagine. But unity is essential. Probate courts favor stability. If you fracture this family, you'll lose your share. My mother's smile sharpened, dressed in warmth but dripping poison. You are our daughter. You'll benefit as much as we do, but you must prove loyalty. Sign, and you'll secure your place in legacy. For a moment, their words hung in the air. Honey over poison. Inheritance dangled like a golden leash. They thought they had me cornered, that the promise of legacy would blind me to the chains they were slipping around my wrists. I glanced at Helena. She said nothing, but her eyes met mine, steady, telling me she understood. This wasn't a gift. It was control. This wasn't legacy. It was bondage. The room grew heavier. The air, almost unbreathable. The chandelier sparkled above us, but all I could hear was the brittle clatter of a fork dropped too hard, the echo of my own heartbeat. My parents were no longer smiling. They were waiting, calculating. I straightened my spine, folded my hands on the table, and let my voice slice through the suffocating quiet. We're finished here tonight. Their expressions froze, and for the first time in my life, I saw not confidence, not command, but fear, raw, unfiltered, impossible to hide. It flickered across their faces before they masked it again. But I caught it, and I knew this battle had only just begun. The morning after that suffocating dinner, I knew words alone would never be enough. My parents weren't asking for trust. They were maneuvering for control. If I wanted to survive their schemes, I had to expose them. That was when Helena introduced me to Grant Mercer, a private investigator with a reputation for uncovering what people buried deepest. He was quiet, deliberate, the kind of man who listened more than he spoke. Within a week, he slid a thick file across Helena's desk, and together we opened the pages of truth. What stared back at me was staggering. Offshore accounts hidden under shell companies, transfers stacked on transfers, loans rolled over like dice in a rigged game. The Rhode Island estate, the crown jewel they had dangled in front of me like bait, was mortgaged to the hilt, its value nothing more than a mirage. They weren't protecting legacy. They were drowning in debt and using me as their lifeline. But the worst came near the end of the file. An application for a new credit line. My name neatly typed at the top. My signature scrawled at the bottom. Except it wasn't mine. The stroke was too perfect, too studied someone who had watched me sign documents 100 times. Rage clawed at my chest as I stared at the forgery. They hadn't just tried to take my assets. They had stolen my identity. Helena's voice broke through my haze, sharp and steady. This isn't family pressure anymore, Serafina. This is fraud, criminal fraud. Her words landed like a hammer, each syllable driving home the truth I could no longer soften with excuses. And then came the receipts, the pawnshop records for heirlooms I had once believed were being appraised. My grandmother's locket, my grandfather's cufflinks, sold off quietly for quick cash. Even history wasn't sacred to them. They had betrayed not only me, but the very legacy they preached about protecting. Armed with the file, we prepared for one last confrontation. My parents invited me back, expecting submission. Instead, I arrived with Helena at my side. The table was once again dressed in silver and crystal, but beneath the gleam, I felt the storm building. I laid the evidence before them: offshore accounts, forged signatures, pawned heirlooms. My mother's face drained of color, her brittle smile cracking. My father's fist slammed the armrest, silver rattling across the table. "This is betrayal," he thundered. "After all we've done, you dare to side with outsiders?" I met his glare with steady eyes. "Family doesn't mean ownership. You've mistaken me for your rescue fund. I won't be your solution." The room shook with silence, broken only by my mother's sobs and the grinding clench of my father's teeth. And then, in the distance, came the sound that sealed everything: the wail of sirens, growing louder. Red and blue lights bled through the tall windows, flickering across their faces, washing them pale. Helena leaned back, her arms crossed as officers filled the doorway. The knock at the door was sharp, final, and my parents' composure collapsed. My mother's pleas broke into panic, her voice cracking as she swore it was all a misunderstanding. My father's anger melted into a stunned silence, his jaw slack, eyes wide with the reality he could no longer control. The police read the charges: fraud, forgery, financial coercion. Every lie, every manipulation had been nailed down with evidence. I stood still, my breath steady, as my parents were confronted not with my submission, but with the justice they had believed they were immune from. The sight of flashing lights across their ashen faces burned into me, not as triumph, but as closure. The people who raised me had tried to strip me of everything, and instead, they were left with nothing. For once, I wasn't their pawn. I was the one who ended the game. When the dust settled, the empire my parents had paraded for decades crumbled almost overnight. Creditors lined their doorstep. The Rhode Island estate slipped into foreclosure, and the curated image of power and elegance collapsed under the weight of unpaid debts. What they had built on illusion was gone, piece by piece, stripped to nothing but silence. Meanwhile, I turned inward not to rebuild for them, but to safeguard for myself. I reinforced my accounts, locked away every deed, updated every password, and placed my life's work into fireproof safes, both literal and symbolic. For the first time, my future felt untouched by guilt, expectation, or manipulation. One evening, snow pressed against the window. I sat with a cup of tea warming my hands. The quiet wasn't empty, it was earned. I realized then that freedom wasn't given to me by family, nor was it guaranteed by blood. It was something I had carved out alone, with scars and persistence as proof. Family doesn't mean ownership. What they stole was money. But what I built after that's mine forever. If this story struck a chord with you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. This channel is where stories of betrayal, justice, and resilience come alive, and your support keeps them being told.